field topics. There had been, over the years now, created a group of people who went to field directors because they wanted to talk about catting and capping. And so if they were shut out, if they were limited to one session only, they had no place to meet and exchange ideas. So in April of '88, just before the May meeting in Toronto, I circulated a memorandum to like 20 key people in the field outside the Census Bureau, saying maybe it was time to have a field technologies conference and to meet concurrently or near or somehow around field directors conference. And I got considerable positive response. I also asked people if they were willing to be in a committee to help form such an organization, and the cream of the crop, I think, volunteered to participate and be part of an organizing committee. And I can mention, I hope I can get them all, Reg Baker, Bill Connett, Shap Wolf, Betsy Morton, Dale DeWitt, Gary Catlin, forgetting somebody, Ray Halley from agriculture. Very powerful in group. So I proposed at that session on where are we going that there be such an organization. And the main response was, well, it seems logistically difficult to do. How are you going to have a separate organization? And after the Toronto meetings, I proposed how it be done, with the field directors starting on a Sunday and ending on Tuesday noon, and field technology starting on a Monday and ending on Wednesday noon, being totally separate except for one meeting on Tuesday and maybe a banquet in common. And that was the plan that was adopted. There also was this planning group met at the Stat Canada Symposium in that same year and got together, put a program together, drafted bylaws and a charter, and was all ready to go by the '89 meeting. I think there had been a charter. I'm trying to reconstruct this. Only Shap Wolf knows for sure. But he dug out what apparently was the old charter, or whatever records there were on the field directors, when he drafted the field technologies charter. And we changed some of the rules, like we opened it eventually to 4 people per agency and 4 more if they were on the program, which would give you 8 per agency for field technologies. And in time, because we had a charter, field directors decided we would be part of the same organization, adopt a similar charter. So in time, this became a common charter and a common organization. When we started to put field technologies together, we said we wanted to respect the rights of the people who wanted to talk about just field topics and the small shops, and always make sure they had the sessions they wanted. That we didn't want to dominate, we wanted to be a separate side part of this. Well, the very first field technologies meeting I couldn't go to. My wife was too ill. And I've been to every one since. And I think I was correct when I predicted beforehand that field technologies would be the bigger organization. I think it was at least the same size right from the first time they both met. But I think it's pleasant that they decided they really wanted to be similar, or they wanted to have essentially common meetings where people could wander to either side, and yet would have room for both sets of interests, would have more formal meetings and informal meetings as well.
Anyone who's ever attended a field director's field technologies conference has great stories to tell of people, places, and events.
I don't really have any war stories to relate, but I have a lot of pleasant recollections. Mostly what stands out in my mind are the interpersonal interactions, the friendships, the camaraderie, the relaxed informality, the renewal of acquaintanceship each year. One was the Wisconsin conference, University of Wisconsin, where typically, and I hadn't mentioned this earlier, but at our meetings where we had sessions dealing with methodology and administrative matters, our dinners were generally followed by a speaker who made a presentation. The speaker was often director of that field organization or someone prominent in the field who had some important developments to communicate to us. In this particular instance, the communication took another form. Bud Sharp, in lieu of the traditional after-dinner presentation, performed for us by slapping the strings of his bass as his jazz trio entertained us.
It was 81 San Diego meetings where we were to have a speaker, Bob Groves, who was in at the census and who couldn't, was maybe 90, well, it must be 91, and he was not allowed to come by the Census Bureau deputy director, and so it became a rallying cry of that meeting, Bob Groves can't come. And to fill the time in, we created a stand-up comedy night, and a number of us got up and told stories, and I was fortunate enough to be master of ceremonies, and I really enjoyed that evening. That was a wonderful time. And we had Reg Baker and Colm O'Murkety and Paul Moore and Ray Halley and Sue Lavin all get up and tell stories, and I thought that was a great deal of fun.
Here at Arizona State University, we hosted meetings in Carefree one year. Carefree is a resort community, a bit of a distance from the Phoenix airport, and there were some mutterings of discontent because of the distance and time needed to reach there until we settled into this desert paradise. There were lovely pools, gardens with a variety of desert plants, pheasant coveys, cottontail rabbits, all calmed their grumbling, and it was a very successful session. Also one time here when we hosted the meetings in Scottsdale, we had a double header. Warren Miller had just recently joined us at Arizona State University, and he graciously consented to deliver the after-dinner address. And Vladimir Schlappentoch, who was a recent refugee from the Soviet Union, relocated to Michigan State University, and he joined us as a speaker after lunch and was able to inform us on the state of polling and surveying in the Soviet Union. Earlier meeting that I thought was wonderful, it was sort of silly, was Chicago. I think it was 85. And we had a dinner in a Chinese restaurant, and we didn't have enough people to fill the restaurant, so they used the other half of this banquet area for a Chinese wedding. And they hung between the two, they just had some drapes, so you could hear everything through this. The speaker was Seymour Sudman, who was going to talk on the future of survey research, and I'm sure had a great talk. But when he got up to talk, on the wedding side, they got really loud. I think they were drinking quite a bit. So there was all this interruption of noise from the other side of the curtain. And I was sitting next to Paul Sheetsley, who was a wonderful man, and we got giggling. And we couldn't stop. We thought it was so funny. And some of the older women, there must have been women older than us at that time, Ellen Spector and so on, looked around like, you silly boys, can't you behave yourself? But we couldn't. And I think we giggled all the way through Sudman's talk. And he had the Chinese on one side and Sheetsley and Nicholls on the other. And he managed to finish. It's amazing he spoke to us after that. But that was certainly a lot of fun. We generally were housed in fine hotels or nice resort areas, or at York University in the Toronto area, we were housed in the dorms with men and women housed on separate floors, and married couples on another floor, and this was changed from our usual continuing interaction during the evening. In New York, we stayed across from Lincoln Center in a hotel which was undergoing a facelift, and I think liposuction at the same time because they were tearing out the innards, and major reconstruction was in progress through the night, drill hammers, etc. So we caught up on our sleep during the conference. And I would hope that my major contribution to these events was raising the level of food appreciation of our group by my ferreting out local gastronomic gems in each community where we met.
Charlie Cannell, for example, got up and talked about the early days when he was, before John Scott, he ran field directors, and I remember he gave a very nice talk. So yes, there used to be a banquet speaker at every session, and somehow that dwindled away when some of them proved to be pretty boring, and some of them and people started drifting away from the banquets. But when we had some sort of comedy routine, then things went very well. There was another one in St. Petersburg Beach where Owen Thornberry took over the evening's entertainment, and a number of us told jokes, and Owen gave out awards to various people who were attending. For example, he gave Bill Connett the Mr. Goody Two-Shoes Award for his behavior, but then at the business meeting that followed, he withdrew it after Bill had misbehaved a bit. So, but we had a lot of fun at some of those meetings. Well, there was another session that I particularly remember. I'm not sure which year it was. I think it may have been the same year that Owen led the after-dinner activities, which was a session in which Owen and I had a debate on the value of Cappy, and there were other speakers, Gene Martin and Sherry Cortland, I think, also. But Owen took occasion to make a personal attack, suggesting that all the good things I said would follow from Cappy were all baloney, to put it more politely than Owen did, and that therefore I was misleading the field. And I got up and I felt had a fairly interesting rejoinder that put Owen down a bit, but I think we both enlightened the issues. We had a wonderful time doing it. We weren't the least bit mad at each other personally, and that was a session which some claim led to the later activities where we got name calling, such as whiny obstructionist and etc.
A review of programs over the years reveals that we're addressing the same issues in 1997 that survey researchers and field operations staff addressed in 1951. However, the introduction of telephone interviewing, CADI and CAPI, and more recently other technologies have had a significant impact on shaping the conference as it has evolved.
But it's still the case that that you can't really do surveys, and you can't learn about them, and you can't appreciate them by going to the professional organizations. The Field Directors Conference is doing a terrific job, I think, and it is interesting to note that the same issues are with us, and they change some. They change when we got into telephone interviewing, when we got into CADI and so forth.
I've expressed my comfort with the informality of the organization and the lack of structure, which seems somewhat inconsistent with my efforts over the years to try to codify the rules and standardize some of the procedures. We had no secretariat. Every time we had a conference, people would have to scurry around determining what the membership list was, who was involved, and if it happened to be a new organization, they would have to consult with all of us to determine how to set up the meetings, whether dues were to be charged, and whether to have formal presentations or not. So over the years, I kept trying to impose some sort of structure without success, although I understand now there are bylaws in the working constitution, and there may even be officers for all I know.
Part of the growth, of course, was simply this proved to be a very successful vehicle, I think, the field technologies, for people who were just getting into CADI or wanted to know about CAPI, for both government agencies and private agencies, for all of them to come together and exchanged views. And it grew because it was popular, and then it even expanded, of course, internationally in time. I think even if there hadn't been a field technologies, survey research itself was growing, and the field side alone would have grown if even if there hadn't had a second organization. There are many sessions now that sound just like the sessions 20 years ago. And I think that's because many of those problems will always be with us, whether they are how to design a questionnaire best, or how to recruit interviewers, or where to recruit interviewers from, or convert non-response respondents. Those problems were there probably 50 years ago, and they'll probably be there 50 years in the future. They were perpetual problems.
We asked Charlie, Morrie, and Bill what each felt were the issues future international field directors' field technologies conferences would face.
What the issues are today, thank God I don't have to know, except to deal with the many nuisance telephone surveys that we get, interrupting my dinner and on other intimate occasions. We used to worry about our response rates, that they would occasionally slip below 85%. I assume that at least this problem has been vanquished with current techniques and skills, and so there's no concern any longer. For the next decades, what kinds of problems, I really don't know, but I assume response rate may continue to be a problem, and a greater problem. I would also expect that electronic telephone gatekeepers like caller ID and message machines and so on compound the problems. I hear tell of use of laptops and video, and presumably Bill Nicholls may speak to this.
Well, I don't think interviewing as we know it is going to disappear, because there are many kinds of research where the interviewer is still essential, and not merely for getting in the door and persuading and answering respondents' questions and establishing legitimacy of the survey. But there are certain kinds of topics where you need a lot of guidance, and almost anything that has a roster in it probably needs an interviewer to help the respondent through it. So I think the interviewer there will be less work for the interviewer. There will be more cases where the interviewer brings the technology and is quiet during the interview, but the interviewer will certainly still be there into the foreseeable future. But I think we'll probably have more debates on the topic of how much and under what circumstances do you want an interviewer actually involved in the data collection rather than as a delivery mechanism. I think that those will be good debates, and it won't always come out that having the interviewer is the best answer, but there will be plenty of work for interviewers in the future.
I think we've talked about the major activities that I think are in the future, and that is two or three things. One is the conflict potential between the use of the computerized interviewing and the interaction, what it does to the interaction, and what the introduction of a third person really in that interaction does. And it may not be important, but we ought to study it. The second main thing, I think, is what is the appropriate methods of interviewing when you're talking about factual information, where there is a clear definition, here's what I mean by it, and how do we get it so that the respondent can understand this, and if the respondent can't understand it, how do we clarify it? Because at the present time, I'm sure that a lot of times, respondent is talking about this, the interviewer is talking about this, and it sounds all right, but it's just the wrong thing. The communication is not properly shared. The concept is not properly shared. And there needs to be a lot of activity toward that. And that leads to the notion of what do we mean by probing? Under what circumstances do we probe for what? And it seems to me we've got two issues. One is, for an attitude question, you don't want anything but non-direction. That's what it was set up to do. For factual information, you need some way in which the interviewer can vary from the rigidity of the question or the rigidity of the probe and do something. Now, I don't know what he does or how he does it, but I think these are the two major issues. We keep talking about standardized interviewing. We kept talking about standardized measurement and so forth. But it's a big gap between the theory and the concept. And if we knew, of course, what to do, we'd have done it. But it needs to be studied.
I think they'll look very much the same. I think the field issues will be the same field issues, and there will still be a small shop versus large shop differences of interest. In fact, they may be greater, the big shops. It takes a lot of money to get into CAPI, to get into audio CASI, to develop the big case management systems to manage CAPI and all these things. The smaller shops may have a somewhat different set of survey interests. But aside from that, I think things will, as I see it, they'll probably go on pretty much the same for a while. Some of the things on the field side we are going to always be facing, whether it's recruitment of interviewers, training interviewers, tracing people. Some of those will just be with us. On the technology side, I think we're going to face a number of increasing problems. One is we have to worry about changing technologies, and technology growth is going to continue, and we're going to be driven by changes in hardware and operating systems and changes, new versions of software, so that people who are into CADI and CAPI are going to have to continually worry about adapting to the changing technological environment, and that's probably going to occupy more and more of our time in the future. And then there will be new technologies. Certainly audio CASI is with us and is probably going to grow in a variety of ways, so there will be a shift again to new technologies there. And it's hard to know. Well, we also have, the growth of internet and web surveys. We'll see how far they really go, but I suspect they will turn out to be a major new activity of survey data collection. We are going to have to cope with both inside of academic and government shops, and as potential competitors in commercial shops where they may not always be done well enough to give a proper sample. We've always in survey research had to worry about the sort of glitzy, low-quality product produced by the commercial sector, or some parts of the commercial sector, and disrupting the respondents and maybe making it hard to show what good quality research is. But I think that may continue to be an increasing problem in the future.